Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Work in Progress. I think this is episode 13, week 13. We've been doing this for a few months now. So this is our weekly show about work, life, and everything in between from the Reno Collective. And very excited today to have Ashley Warren on for to talk about side hustles and all things just getting work done without burning out today. And as always, we have Rachel with us as well. I'm going to turn down
Hello,
this
hello.
so I can hear you all.
Hi. Good.
All right.
So,
So go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to say, so Ashley, tell us
Yes.
a little bit about what it is that you do.
Sure. So let's see. I work full-time as a content strategist for a finance investing company here in Reno. And I spend a lot of time on my creative side hustle. So for that, that means that I have like my side business called ScribeMind, which has been my business for quite a few years now. And I also do some contract work for Dungeons and Dragons and narrative design in that world. And so a lot of my side creative work includes both writing, but also working with writers and developing resources and like educational content for writers. So my whole world is pretty much about writing and content creation, both in my professional full-time job and then all my side work. So I would say that's what my current focus is and what I've been doing for the past couple of years.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's perfect.
Yeah, and I think your blog post that you wrote was what got our attention. You know, we always talk about all the different side hustles that we're doing, but you wrote this really great blog post about balancing a full-time job with a creative side hustle. And I think what's really relevant for our members and for our audience is that I think a lot of people think that unless they go full freelance or are completely in charge of, like, you know, that if you're working for someone that you're not successful in some ways. And I think you didn't necessarily touch on that in the article, but we hear that a lot, where if someone's going to be a writer, that they're not really a writer unless they're making 100% of their income from writing a book, or like you've done, you know, writing with D&D or other entities. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about like why doing both is a good idea, why maybe you shouldn't do both, plus some tips and some best practices to kind of make that work. And you kind of made this episode easy for us since you kind of gave us a little bit of a path there. But yes, and I'm watching the chat. So if anybody has any questions, I'll be sure to funnel those questions to Ashley and Rachel as we go. Those of you on, I think we're on all the things right now, Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube. So yeah, very excited to have you, Ashley. And so I think the first thing would be to maybe set the ground on like what is a creative side hustle in your mind. And honestly, I think maybe even defining the word hustle and or the problems with the word hustle, I guess.
Sure. So to me, a creative side hustle is basically just a professional endeavor that you have outside of your day job that's usually creative in nature. You might be a writer or a designer, a photographer, basically anything that, you know, constitutes creative work. And I don't love the word hustle because I'm not a huge fan of hustle culture. I think that although I'm like a big nerd about productivity, I don't really like the idea of like working all the time, the rise and grind mentality. Like I just think that to me, creativity is so much a part of my life, and I want it to be like a healthy relationship rather than something that I'm just constantly like hustling at. But I do like the word, I like side hustle as kind of a descriptor because it is sometimes how it feels. You're always just kind of like building up your, you know, your side creative endeavors. And I think especially for creatives, like people who are, you know, writers or artists who are seeking, you know, big opportunities, especially, you know, to get published or things like that, it can feel like a hustle to always be working toward those kinds of goals. But in general, I don't really love the idea of hustling just because I think that that's not really a good, as we'll talk about, like a good work-life balance, but I just think it's not a good thing to aspire for. I think we should be working just in ways that actually fit with our lifestyle, which is why I like to have a creative side hustle with my full-time job, because to me that really supports the lifestyle that I personally aspire for. And I just think that that's kind of like the way of the past, the way we used to talk about productivity, like wake up at 4 a.m., only drink gross protein shakes or whatever, like you don't have time to eat, eating's for losers, like doing normal things. But it's like, that's what life is about. So I think that, I don't love the word hustle, but I think side hustle is kind of a good way to think about, doing something on the side. But it's basically just your side gig, I guess. I feel like it's hard for me to come up with a good descriptor of it, because for me, it's like it's my business, it's my company. So it's more than just like one project. It's not really a side project. And I also feel like to say that it's just like, oh, it's just this thing I do on the side is not really accurate, because I spend many hours of my life working on my personal like business. Like even though it's my side thing, it's still just as important to me as my day job. And so I don't know, I still haven't really found like a perfect descriptor of that yet. Open to ideas, but that's kind of how I think of it.
I think the chat's going to come up with some ideas for us, definitely.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, there we go.
But I think well, let's definitely, I want to eventually come back to why you actually have both, right? Why not just have a day job? Why do you do all that you do on top of that? And you've alluded to it a little bit, but I think the other thing we focus on, especially during COVID, we can't really fully have a show and not talk about COVID, but the idea that like we at the collective like to focus on, and for those of you playing the Atomic Habits drinking game at home, we're going to say Atomic Habits again.
Yes.
Atomic Habits and the book Essentialism is one of my favorites as well. And we do a lot of productivity and professional and personal development here. It's not so that you're 100% maximally effective all the time. It's so that you can get the right things done, close your computer and go live your life, right? It's instead of spinning your wheels on all these other things that maybe aren't something you're passionate about. But obviously with passion also comes paying the bills. So what would be some of the reasons that we would want to have both a full-time job and a side hustle?
So I feel like for me, finance is part of it. I do like financial stability, and I don't feel ashamed to say it. I feel like I have been a full-time freelancer before. So I feel like I come at this perspective having not worked for other people for a while. And like, I feel like to me, that basically was why I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. There's a lot of benefits to working for yourself, being your own boss, or at least being like a full-time contractor. And I think that depending on the work that you do, that is a good choice for a lot of creatives. So I'm not saying that I'm against that. I just feel like for me personally, I had to work so much harder to meet kind of the same just financial and personal goals than now that I have a full-time job, I'm able to meet a little bit easier. And I also feel like on a personal level, I feel more creative when I know that my basic needs are taken care of. And so if I can have a nice home, I mean, I have a small but humble, home that I, love to invest in and put my, time and resources into. And so having a full-time job allows me to do that, and it allows me to travel and to do the things that I want in my life without always having to worry about making ends meet. And of course, I don't want to perpetuate the stereotype that being a full-time independent creative means that you're always struggling. Because I think if you're smart about your business, you can of course live a perfectly successful life that way. I just feel like for me personally, I wasn't ever meeting those kind of personal metrics. I was working a lot. I was always tired. I think it was also at stages in my life where I hadn't really built up, the savings and the investments that I'm able to now later in my career, a decade after really being in the workforce. And so I could see that being a better option for me maybe in the future to really go back to that. But I just feel like for me at this time in my life, in my 30s, I just feel like it meets a lot of my needs to have income coming in, to have that stable job, to have some structure in my day and in my weeks, to have the benefits that come with employment, because that is nice to have health benefits and the good things like that. Even though you can get those things as an independent worker, there's a lot more obstacles there. And so I do feel like those things matter to me. It's not because I'm materialistic or want lots of money. It's just I want to be stable and grow those things for myself and for my husband and our future family. And so that does play a role. But I also just feel like I I don't want to do one thing all day, every day. I like to have some variety in the type of work that I get to do. And I like to work. I
Yeah.
think work is, I get a lot of personal enjoyment out of working and contributing to a team. Which is actually another reason why I like to work full time as well, is because I like being part of a team. I like being part of a company, and then doing my own work, outside of that. I feel like that just has it, a good balance for me, because I don't really aspire to grow like a huge company on my own, just too much work. So this is like kind of, I get the best of both worlds that way. So
Well,
those are my personal reasons for liking this setup.
yeah, well, and something that you sort of touched on a couple times was like the idea of that sort of drive to do what makes you personally happy, and so to like meet your own personal needs as well. So your enjoyment of writing and being able to do that in a creative way versus while your job isn't not creative,
Right.
it's structured in a way that you can't just write about Dungeons and Dragons during your
Right.
day job, right? I mean, sort of, but you've got that, you're meeting that, or fulfilling the need to be creative in your own personal way, which I think a lot of people look for. And I think there's something, it's, I'm not sure how many people are able to carve out that time to find a way to monetize some of those things, where you like, maybe it's you've got like, you enjoy watercolors on the weekend and then you sell your postcards at an art fair or something like that. I just think it's, well done for you for being able to create that, a system that that works for you in order to have the extra income as well as fulfilling that need, which, yeah, so good job.
Well, I think the challenge too is that oftentimes, like the things that are creative for us, if they become a job, they then become something that we don't love as much,
Mm,
right? Where you can still get paid for the creative thing that you do, but if I think what you're alluding to with the stability is that, like, even as a freelancer, you may have plenty of work, but the
Mhm.
biggest difference, and this is something that I would love to see changed in the world of freelance, is that you invoice a client and they're like, well, we'll pay you in 60 days. Well, it's like, well,
Right.
I just worked my ass off for you.
Yeah.
And
mm-hmm.
actually, this is, I'm not inventory. So you don't have like this 30-day net thing. So
Yeah.
figuring out like, like even now when I've done invoices and when I used to be a freelancer, it was like net 15 because the work is already done. The ship is already sailed. There's no reconsidering that. And I think a lot of other people, a lot of people go into freelancing because they either have to or they want to, but they haven't set up that stability. And it's almost
Right.
like being paycheck to paycheck, but you're actually
Mm-hmm.
invoice to invoice. And when those invoices don't arrive when you think they will, versus a payroll where you know how much you're being paid. And so if you're trying to make your, creative passion your full-time freelance job, there are ways to do that. And we've mentioned tools like Catch on here before that helps you save for retirement. But it is unfortunate that like a lot of people that are in freelancing are, they'll think the next project will get me caught up, the next project I'll save for retirement.
Right.
And unfortunately that never comes because you're always playing catch up. And so I think having that day job allows you to have that stability, have those needs met, and then you can experiment with maybe things that don't necessarily need to make the full, they don't need to cover your financial house and get everything in order every single time. And you can also then explore, you're like, I'm going to play with leatherworking this weekend, or I'm going to play with watercolors
Right.
next weekend. And
Yeah.
you can have
Yeah.
some variety to it instead of, trying to define yourself as like a mixed media artist or something like that. So,
Yeah, I also feel like on the flip side, my having a side hustle, which I've always had pretty much my whole life in some capacity,
Mhm.
has also kind of, saved my butt when I haven't had full-time employment. I feel like it kind of works both ways, that when I maintain my side work, I always have something to fall back on in the event that, I lost my full-time job
Yeah.
and that would change my financial situation. I at least have something, a way to always be making income. Additionally, it helps me build my skill set so that I always have a portfolio. I always have a solid resume. And for me personally, my side hustles have always, always, always gotten me jobs. Like, it's more than my degrees, it's more than even previous job experience. It's showing like what I have done on my own that has gotten me,
Mhm.
I think, some of the best jobs that I've been able to do in my career so far.
yeah.
And so I just feel like for me personally, that's like my resume maker.
It
And so
shows, it
I
shows your hustle.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah, it shows like, I mean, yeah, obviously like you have to have a lot of discipline to have well, I don't really like the word discipline because I think there's a lot that goes into that. Same that I don't like the word like lazy. Like there's a lot of things that go into that, but I won't get into that right now. But I feel like it shows that you are capable of, ideating, but also seeing projects through to completion on your own. You learn, you're self-learner, because pretty much everything I know how to do, I mean, a lot I learned in school, but a lot of the things I really do on a day-to-day basis are things that I've learned on my own that I just had to figure out because I didn't know how to, do anything in MailChimp until I just like figured out how to do that. And now it's like a huge part of my day job because that was a skill that I was able to acquire just on my own. And so I feel like when you have a side hustle, you can continue to build up a skill set that'll probably serve you well in other aspects of your professional life. So I would never only do a day job without having something going for myself on the side. And like, I don't like to do just one. I like to have both because I feel like they help each other and they allow me to meet goals that I don't know if I would really be able to make the same way if I was just doing one or the other.
Yeah, and I don't
So,
think we're trying to define that one of these is better or worse
Right.
than the other, right? So it's your mileage will vary. Maybe
Right.
you
right, yeah.
should and will be a full-time freelancer. Maybe you
Yeah.
need it to be a little bit of both. Maybe it's even a part-time job, and you're having a Patreon plus releasing art or whatever that might be. Go ahead, Rachel.
Well, I was just going to say, like, so there's a lot of benefits for you. What are some of the pros and cons that you see as far as, or I guess the cons, as far as having a side hustle? Or maybe it's less, what part is hard? It's more, what part do you have to work extra for? Or maybe how do you define whether you go on that side hustle journey or not?
Sure. So I'll say that at this point in my life, like I don't have children, and I think that makes a huge difference because my life is structured in a way that I'm really only responsible for, myself and my husband. But I fully anticipate that when we do start a family, that I will have to change a little bit of my dynamic. And that might mean that my side hustle, I would never like totally stop doing it, but I will just have to change my, workload and be reasonable with myself about that. So I do think that structure can be a little bit hard to maintain depending on your commitments outside of work. So if you're like a caretaker of any kind, whether that's a parent or, you take care of someone in your family, that, obviously cuts into time that other people might have as freely available time. But I mean, again, like it's not always the case. I've definitely had times in my life where, I've had family emergencies and things to deal with. So it's not that like every day after work, I just am like, oh, free time. I have no responsibilities.
What
it's
shall
just
I do?
Right. Like, what should I do? I never have that moment where I'm like, oh, I have nothing to do right now. I don't even know what that feels like. That is such a foreign concept to me at this point. And, but I do feel like because I have like really learned about myself that I like to have a side hustle and a full-time job, I kind of have structured my life in a way to account for that. So that does mean that I probably work more like hours than someone who just does one or the other, depending on how you structure your time, which is a choice that I'm making. There's things that I sacrifice to do that. Like I, in theory, would like to play more video games, but video games for me are a big time sink. And I just don't have the time really to do that when I could be doing things for my business. I still have lots of hobbies, but I've kind of picked hobbies that are easier for me to, drop in and out of. Like I like to knit. I like to read, I like to do things that aren't necessarily big time commitments, but it does prevent me from doing other things that I would like to do with my time, like maybe, volunteering or things like that. Again, something that I can always just like figure out a way to factor into my life, but my current setup doesn't really allow for me to have lots of extra time like that. So I do think that if you, depending on what you want from your side hustle or from your full-time job, figuring out what you might have to give up is important, and just be honest with yourself. I don't really feel like at this point that I'm sacrificing anything like major or real. It's mostly just it's how I'm using my free time that I have to be very particular about. And that can be kind of a hard thing to really like learn. But I'm not kidding when I say like I've always had a side hustle since I was like 13 years old. I've always like done something with most of my time, like go to school, and then I've always worked, and then I've always had like a creative thing on the side. So at this point, it's kind of, I don't know what it's like to only have a normal job and to
Right.
just come home and not work more. Like, what? People do that?
It's definitely inspirational, but yeah, I know you have a very strong, personality and drive and motivation. I know that's a part of it, but some of the things that you touched on in the blog was some of the best practices, like how to teach yourself, how to train yourself to do that. So for someone who might be listening that is, working full time but would like to segue into a side hustle, or that person who is trying to segue into the side hustle in order to make it their full-time hustle,
Right.
what are some of those things?
And maybe I would add how not to burn out while you're trying to
I
explore this.
Yeah.
So burnout is very real for creative people and pretty much anyone in general. But I think that creatives and people who both work, full-time for themselves, work full-time for other people, or just creative in general, experience burnout. And it's basically when you just get to a point where you're always working, you're always really putting your brain like through its paces, because creative work is really mentally taxing work. So I really feel like at the end of the day, most days I'm like spent because my brain is just tired. So I think that the goal should always be to prevent burnout, prevent getting to that stage where you just feel exhausted. And it's more than just feeling tired. When I've felt burnout many times in my life when I have not properly, managed my time, or I've overcommitted, like I've definitely gone through that. So I say all of this having full well gone through it, but it's not just being tired. You really feel like you kind of crash and you feel exhausted, and it's really hard to kind of climb out of that. It almost feels like depression if you've gone through depression and burnout. You kind of see the similarities there, which unfortunately I have experienced both, and it's not fun. So I think that for people who want to start a side hustle, that's a great thing to want to do. I really recommend starting small and building up habits little by little, rather than just jumping in with both feet, unless you really feel like you have like people who can do a project with you, or you really feel like you have enough like financial support where some of those inherent risks aren't as important for you. But I think just like start to build the habits, get in the habit of being really organized, having good productivity systems, even before you start your actual like idea or business. Build those systems for yourself. Start factoring in the time that you would spend on your side hustle. Like take an audit of your week and say, like, this is what I spend my week doing. What's the time that I would want to dedicate to the side hustle? And would I be happy and motivated to do that? And I think a lot of people are. When you have a really great idea, you want to work on it, you're excited to see it come to fruition, but it still is a commitment. And it's a commitment that you're making to yourself, especially when there's, money involved, or you take on work from other people and there's, contracts, and it becomes a professional obligation. So I don't think it's something that you have to do right away. I will say that I work more on my side hustle than I ever have in my life, but I feel way more balanced with how I approach it. And I think it's only because I've spent a really long time doing little by little and picking out the pieces that I know really work for me and really work for my business and give me a good return on my investment beyond just money. It's just the time. Like, I actually feel like I'm putting my effort into the right things. But it took a long time for me to figure that out. So I don't expect anyone to just know those things immediately. You have to really learn those for yourself. So start small. It doesn't mean you're being less ambitious. It just means that you're setting up a sustainable system for yourself.
Definitely. And I think you mentioned that like you've been doing side hustles of some kind, but even, having freelanced for almost a decade, it's like that whole thing where like overnight success takes a decade to really happen. Is that, freelancing 10 years ago for me was very different than if I were to freelance today. And we've just, things are that we've reprioritized like what's important to us. And I know you have a few more things here we want to talk about, and we can go over a little bit on this episode. But if anybody has any specific questions, feel free to drop them in chat, and we'll take questions after Ashley gets through a couple more of her best practices. But definitely have some good comments in chat about avoiding burnout, and that knitting. Suting definitely mentioned that knitting can be a big time commitment, and you can get good enough where you can knit at the same time while you're doing something else. Like
that's the goal. I actually I do like to knit while like listening to a podcast. I feel like that's a good multitasking like project for me, because I am awful at listening to things. Like if I am doing anything and then like I have the radio on or a podcast, I like don't hear it. I'm just really bad at like focusing on audio stuff. So knitting has actually really helped with that. So I would love to really improve my knitting skills. For now, it's just it's a fun way for me to not be on a computer.
Yeah. No, that AFK time is important.
So when,
go ahead.
go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, one of the next points that you had mentioned in the blog was about prioritizing. And that is, I know, a huge, we could just write books and books. And obviously there are books and books about this. And it's still something like, I mean, we address this, I think, a couple times a year with our members as like a group, but just the idea of prioritizing it is very difficult to maintain, I find.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a tried and true system necessarily. I just think that you have to be pretty ruthless with how you prioritize. And what I love is and I learned this from Colleen, who you had on the show, I think it was last week. And because when she had taught she had done like a kind of like a productivity workshop, mindfulness workshop at the collective. And I learned so much. I still have all my notes from that. It was just so helpful. But she distinguished between, actual demands and perceived demands. And for me, that was like mind-blowing, life-changing, because even though it's like a fairly simple concept, it makes a lot of sense. Because what used to happen to me was I would just get into this rut of every single day. I would create an overly ambitious to-do list. I would only get through, the reasonable amount of to-dos. And then I would just feel like, oh, there's so much that I didn't get done today. And I just felt like I was always in that. It just was like always in this mindset of just never getting enough done and always feeling like I had so much to do and never feeling like I was making good progress. And so when Colleen explained the difference between that, I was like, oh, it's because I'm like piling on perceived demands onto my schedule. And so I really use that now to help me prioritize. And I talked about this recently on a stream that I did, but I have like kind of a personal rubric that I use for how I determine what's an actual demand and what's a perceived demand. Usually that means like, is there a stakeholder involved? Is there like a strict deadline? Like, have I committed to doing a project for someone else that has a deadline? Have I, taken care of my personal wellness and, well-being, like making sure that I'm not working so hard on this that I haven't, eaten or drink water or exercised or whatever. And basically when I go through my rubric, it helps me to decide like if it's an actual demand and a perceived demand. And what I really found for myself is that a lot of the things that I think are important that I need to get done right away aren't really that. It's not that they're not important. It's just that they don't need to be done right away. And I need to adjust my perspective on it and be a little bit more adaptable. And then that frees me up to focus on the things that are actually important. And I think that when you get into the habit of understanding what those are for you, and everyone's rubric might be kind of different, but I think that's really helpful for just prioritizing things in our lives beyond just our work, because that also helps me when I'm trying to prioritize the things I need to do just in my day-to-day life. And I also think when prioritizing, we should be factoring in all the real world stuff that we have to do. And I think it's helpful to also prioritize, time with your family and making doctor's appointments and doing all those things. Sometimes when I think we think too separately about it, we're not really giving ourselves an honest, holistic view of everything that we need to do. And so we prioritize the wrong things. So I think it's good to factor those into your, not just your like to-do list, but just how you approach planning and productivity in general. But yeah, I really feel like the perceived versus actual is like, if you can do that, it really makes a huge difference. That's really helped me a lot, because now my to-do lists that I make every day are a lot more reasonable. And I also, if I don't finish something, I'm not beating myself up about it, because I know that I've already done the work to kind of filter through what's most important. And if I've done what's most important, then that's all I can reasonably do that day. And that's just how it is. I think we should be nicer to ourselves.
Yeah.
Which is not something that comes easy to me.
Can you explain the idea of, I think you've used this before, the analogy of juggling with different types of materials, I guess, like a glass versus rubber.
So that is not something that I came up with. Right. It is, I should have written it down. I don't remember who exactly. Yes. So there's a great Twitter thread about it. And I don't know if you look it up. Honestly, when I did look it up once for a blog post, it was attributed to a lot of different people. So someone brilliant came up with this analogy for learning how to juggle like balls of glass versus jars of rubber versus balls of rubber. We're just going to stick to the same item here. But when you learn what those mean for you, you can figure out what you can drop. So sometimes what you think might be a ball of glass is actually a ball of rubber. And if you drop it, it's not the end of the world. But some things are important and can't really be dropped. And those are the things that you should be prioritizing. So what those are for you is unique to you. So there's not one thing. I can't say that like the same thing is, important for everyone. But I think taking the time and actually documenting what those are for you is important. I really think that the more you can document and actually get out of your head, then you have an accountability system for yourself. You have an archive that you can always reference. And nothing that you document ever needs to be like set in stone. You're just kind of making life a little bit easier for yourself by actually specifying that these are the things that I don't ever want to drop. And these are the things that I can be a little bit flexible about. And with that analogy, especially the one that I saw on Twitter, they drill down a little bit further that it's not so much like family is always a glass ball and work is always a rubber ball. It's within that you have the balls of glass and the balls of rubber. And so like sometimes when it comes to your family, if I'm trying to think of like a good example. Like if you needed to bake cupcakes for your kid's class and you forgot about it, like not a ball of glass. It's a family thing, but it's not something that if you didn't do it, not the end of the world. No one's dying from that. So just like figuring out like what those mean on a pretty specific level. I think the more specific you can be with your planning and your productivity, the better, because I think we think too high level about things when we're prioritizing. You really have to drill down into the action items to really understand where your time is going. But then like figuring out and assigning those to what's important, what's an actual demand, perceived demand, what's glass, what's rubber is a good system to implement for yourself in general in your life.
Yeah, that makes me think of I think it's the Eisenhower matrix.
Yes.
So timely,
yes.
Or I'm sorry, urgent and important. And the 4, every time I do that, I always drop, it's like, okay, not urgent and not important. That goes away.
Yeah.
It's just like that. I find that very helpful, but then I usually end up putting a little too much in the urgent, but urgent and important. And then the urgent and not important tend to be where I get stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I like bullet journaling, especially if you're writing it out, is that if you write out all these things and you're moving, like all the things that you want to get done or need to get done, and if you find that you're continually moving them from day to day or week to week or month to month, now it's time to rethink, like, I keep rewriting this thing down, but I'm not doing it. And if you think about like your calendar as like where you're spending your time and where your priorities really are, then maybe it's not something I really need to do. Maybe it's a perceived demand. Maybe it can be done differently. Maybe someone else can do it, right? We can delegate it. And there was another point I was going to go with that. It'll come back to me. But that we always perceive these things as like we have to get them done and we're going to stay up all night and get all this stuff done, and then you feel like shit the next day, and now that day's work is not going to get done, and now you're behind the ball. And so with that, I think taking care of ourselves and being able to have like a reset becomes really important. So what does that look like for you? I think we're gonna round things out here with a little bit of self-care, and then we'll take any questions that might pop up. But I think, being able to, it actually just came back, is that a lot of people think about what they're going to do in the future. And so they think about all the things they need to do or what might be a glass ball and a rubber ball. But the other thing you might be able to do is go back and look at your calendar and audit where you spend your time and basically answer the question of, did this give me energy or did this take away energy? And not necessarily that you're going to get rid of all the things that take away energy. It's just an energy audit to understand that like going to the gym, most people would think takes away energy. But if you do it regularly, you're actually gaining energy and you're able to like actually focus on the day. But maybe you're having a day full of meetings and then you look at that to-do list and you're like, well, yeah, I'm never going to get all these things done if I'm always in meetings. So how can I change up how my day is? Is there certain days of meetings, certain days of heads down work? Is it mornings and afternoons? What does that look like for different people? But let's say you get all of that going. What does it look like to reset and relax as well?
Well, I feel like to that point, something that I used to really struggle with that only really in the past, probably a year, maybe a year and a half, I finally have kind of figured out for myself is that I always feel like I can't fully relax until everything is done. And so what do you do when you have ongoing things indefinitely? Do you just never relax? Well, that was my strategy. I would just like never like fully let myself rest and relax and, refill my creative well until like everything on my plate was done. And I just realized that for like several years, I just never really fully took the time to rest. I mean, of course, doesn't mean that I was constantly working. I just wasn't really letting myself like indulge in the things that I knew would actually, make me feel more creative or make me feel more rested. And so I feel better about that now, in part because I have a better prioritization system. And something that helped with that was in my journal, and I use this also in my Notion where I organize a lot of my stuff for the day, but it's just asking myself like, what can I get done today that will give me some peace of mind this evening so that I can fully just actually relax and just have some downtime, like real downtime, and not always be ruminating on the things I didn't complete. So it really took me a while though to kind of change that mentality. It was not easy because I was always thinking of myself on the other side of a project. Like I loved the feeling of finishing a big project. I just like live for that feeling. But then I had a lot of big projects that were always happening, and I just never really got that moment because there was always something else to do. So I never really just got to stop and relax. So what I also do now, which has also helped me prevent burnout and prevent overcommitting to things, is I've implemented like a 2-day rule into my life where I try to allocate 2 days every week where I don't have to work on my side hustle in the evenings. It's just totally free time. If I want to, and I have a fun thing that I might want to work on, that's kind of okay. But I try to really just like leave 2 evenings totally open to not work, because I usually feel like I get a lot of good ideas for things during that time anyway. So I'm actually going to do that tonight. And I already told my husband, I'm like, I am not working on anything tonight. We're going to watch Peaky Blinders. We're going to drink some wine. We're going to just like hang out, really have like some good time to just hang out together and just have fun, because I worked my butt off today so that I could do that tonight. And it feels nice to like not feel like I have to work tonight because I had a deadline that I overcommitted to, or I have too much on my plate where I can't have those evenings that are just free. And same with the weekends. Yeah. Sometimes I'm like, I'll commit to working a little bit more in the evenings this week if it means that on the weekends I will be totally offline and I can just do my own thing and not feel like I have things that I didn't get done. And so I kind of recommend that, especially for people who are side hustling and working full time. If you don't have that baked into your schedule, try baking it into your schedule. I actually had to put time on my schedule to get into that habit, because it was not easy for me to cut myself off from work. Not because I'm like a workaholic. I just always felt like, well, I could just work on this project tonight. Right. I could just get this done. I mean, I could just be on my laptop and watch TV, but then I just was never giving myself those breaks to really fully relax. Yeah. And so in general, I just feel like rest for me means usually in some way engaging with something creative. I love to read. I really feel like when I give myself time to read, my writing is so much better for it, but I have to factor in time to read into my schedule. Yeah. And so I've been reading a lot lately, which is why I think I've also been writing a lot, because I just feel inspired to write. So I feel like when I give myself time to not actively be writing and to let myself be inspired by other people, then it positively affects my own work. And it's just a fun way to spend my time. I like I mentioned, I like to knit. Not a great knitter. I mean, I do okay, chunky knit, simple, stockinette stitch. It's all you really need to make a hat. And so I like
over my head. So
I mean, I feel like I definitely have the basics down. I just can't. I'm not like Sue level knit.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone is besides Sue. So
yes, that's very true.
Well, there's also, I mean, like some people like will skip going and doing a workout, and I know a lot of people may not think of that as self-care, but like it is, right? And for me, like when I'm doing a particularly hard programming problem or something, staring at the screen, working more almost never solves it. It's getting away from the screen, going for a run, and you almost like load up your subconscious with all this stuff. And yeah, my idea is I don't want to go for a run and stress out about my problem. but I'm going to go for a run, hang it up and come back to it. And almost always it's just like the shower thoughts and things like that, right? It's like it comes to you when you least expect it, when you're working out, when you're doing dishes, whatever that might be. And so you almost you have to let your brain have some space so that you can figure some of those things out. And you can't force words out on the page when you're stressed, and all that. Sometimes you have to, right? Sometimes you have a deadline, but
I think that those moments can be avoided if you try to plan. I mean, of course, you can't ever plan for everything, and sometimes you do run up against deadlines. But I think that the more you can factor in those free times in big chunks of time, then it does kind of prevent you from ever really getting to that point. Because I feel like when I have that factored into my schedule, I won't accept a new project or start a new thing if it'll infringe on that time. And I'm really strict about that now, because I was not strict about that for a long time, and I would just take things as they came, because I was even projects that I was really excited about, because it's not always projects that I'm doing for money. It's something that I just feel like is a cool project, but then it's not fun when you're working all the time. So yeah.
Well, and we skimmed over this one, but you had mentioned like figuring out what your time is worth, and we'll post the link to this to her blog post in the show notes and in the various chats. But the idea that like once you figure out what your time is worth, it isn't always money, right? And your personal time should be worth 2, 3, 4 times what your work time is. It's not, oh, well, I'll just not have fun this weekend, or I won't relax this weekend. I'm going to, there's some available time and we'll pencil you in. It's like, no, that time needs to have a boundary around it. It needs to be sacred so that you can be fully relaxed. But I think we're at time. So Ashley has lots of content out on the interwebs that we're going to have her share with us. She has things like newsletters and her website and her own Twitch streams around creativity. And I'll let you give the spiel about where people can find you, Ashley, and what kind of content you put out there.
Sure. So you can find me at scribemind.com. The word scribe and mind smushed together. That's my domain. So I write a lot about these kinds of topics, mostly because I've learned a lot of things the hard way, and I want to prevent other people from making the same mistakes that I've made. So hopefully these kinds of topics are helpful to you. I also have a Patreon where you can basically request topics that I can cover or research for you and share and write, blog posts or create worksheets and templates. And that's patreon.com/scribemind. And really my website's probably the best place to go because it has links to my social media accounts. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter. Instagram is my favorite, so connect with me there. And yeah, I'm always happy to connect with other creatives. And really my goal at this point with my side hustle is to develop resources to help other creatives. So that's a huge focus of mine now and will be in 2021 as well. So I have a lot of fun like courses and email series and worksheets and all the good stuff. So that's all coming next year. So you can be part of the ScribeMind community.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Ashley.
Thank you very much. I'm definitely going to be going back over this.
Thank you.
Lots and lots of links to share and more questions to ask you. So we might end up doing a part 2, maybe talking about what you're going to do next year.
Oh yeah. Yeah, sure. I feel like with this topic specifically, there's a lot to talk about. And I know you two have a lot of wisdom with your experience as well. So yeah, there's just like too much to talk about in 45 minutes.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's true. And thank you so much.
Yeah. I was gonna say no one wants to hear just Rachel and I talking, so it's good to get someone else on there.
I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I've known you both for a long time, so I appreciate all the wisdom that you have to share.
Rachel and I have these conversations all day long, so it's good to add a third voice to the conversation for sure. And I hope you guys all enjoyed it out there. Thanks so much for joining us. And we do this every Wednesday at 5:00, different topics. So if there's something that you want to talk about, if there's something you want to see us find someone to talk about, we can definitely do that. We've talked about what board games you should be playing at home, all the way to how to be a good freelancer. So really no topic is off limits. So thanks all for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Same place, same time. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.